There are places in the world where silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something that does not wish to be named. Places where the walls have accumulated not merely centuries of stone, but invisible layers of prayers, of fears, and of secrets that no official scripture has ever recorded. The secret exorcism of the Vatican belongs to that category of events existing at the margins of what history consents to tell. And it is precisely at that margin that the invisible finds its most powerful voice. The Vatican exists as both symbol and fortress. To the world, it is the visible center of a faith that has crossed millennia. To those who walk its deepest corridors, there is another dimension, one that rarely appears in encyclicals or public statements. It is there, in that zone of deliberate silence, that certain rituals take place far from camera flashes, far from crowds, far from any official record. The secret exorcism is not urban legend. It is a practice documented in archives that few are authorized to consult. The story unfolding now does not begin with a scream. It begins with a closed door, a door behind which voices ask questions that no human being should be able to answer. And it begins as well with men of faith, men trained for years to face the invisible, who enter that room with certainty in their eyes and leave with something they were never fully able to name. What happened in that ritual was never officially acknowledged, but those who were present were never the same again. The secret exorcism at the Vatican is not merely an isolated case. It is a reflection of a tension that the Church has carried since its earliest days, the tension between what faith proclaims publicly and what faith confronts in silence, between the dogma illuminated by sunlight and the rituals conducted in the darkness of nameless chapels. That tension was never resolved. It was merely learned to be contained, and not always with success. If something in this account has already touched a memory whose origin you cannot quite identify, stay. What is about to be revealed is not merely a story about possession or about rituals. It is a story about the limits of the human before the incomprehensible, and about what happens when those limits are crossed, even by those who believed themselves most prepared for an encounter with the unknown. If this mystery has already stirred something in you, stay until the end. There is something here that needs to be heard. The practice of exorcism was not born within walls. It was born in the desert, on the frontiers between what human beings can comprehend and what has always escaped them. Since the earliest sacred texts, the idea that entities external to the human could inhabit bodies and minds was treated with a seriousness that never fully disappeared, even in times when science began offering its own explanations for the same phenomena. The Church absorbed that ancient tradition and formalized it. It created protocols, it created language, and it created above all a structure for confronting what has no structure. The Roman ritual, compiled over generations of theologians and exorcists, is the set of prayers and procedures the Church authorizes for exorcism. But what few outside ecclesiastical walls know is that this ritual is only the visible layer of a far deeper tradition, a tradition that acknowledges that certain forces do not simply respond to words pronounced in Latin. There is a wisdom accumulated through centuries of encounters with the inexplicable, and that wisdom is not found in books open to the public. It resides in sealed archives, in the memories of priests who never wrote about what they saw, and in the eyes of men who learned to be silent before they learned to speak. Within the Vatican, there exists a quiet structure dedicated to what the Church calls spiritual assistance in extraordinary cases. It is a carefully constructed euphemism. Behind it stand designated exorcists, priests with specific training, authorization from the ecclesiastical hierarchy, and years of experience with cases that doctors and psychiatrists returned without diagnosis. The modern Church does not like to use the word possession lightly. Before any ritual is authorized, the individual undergoes rigorous medical screening. Psychologists are consulted. Neurologists issue reports. Only when all natural explanations have been ruled out, and even then with reluctance, is the spiritual possibility considered. But there are cases that escape this institutional caution, cases that arrive unexpectedly, that evolve in ways the protocols do not anticipate, that present characteristics that cause even the most experienced to hesitate before acting. It is in these cases that the ritual, conceived as a tool of liberation, can become something different. Not because faith fails, but because what faith faces is sometimes greater, or at least more unpredictable, than any manual can anticipate. The secret exorcism that took place within the sacred walls belongs to that exceptional category. Each layer of this story that reveals itself carries with it another shadow. The Church knows this. That is why it keeps certain things in silence, not out of dishonesty, but as a form of protection that transcends institutional bureaucracy. What is kept in the Vatican archives is not merely information. It is living memory of encounters that forever changed those who experienced them. Keep watching. The veil has not yet fully lifted. Among the most documented exorcists in the Church's recent history, there is a figure who became a reference not only within ecclesiastical walls, but also in the imagination of scholars of the supernatural around the world. This priest, whose name resonates in the corridors of those who research the subject seriously, dedicated entire decades to what he called daily spiritual warfare. He did not speak of the devil with the drama of fiction. He spoke with the sobriety of someone describing a real adversary, known and studied over a lifetime of confrontations. And it was precisely that sobriety that made his accounts so disturbing. In his memoirs and statements, some recorded, others only repeated orally among those who knew him, this exorcist described recurring characteristics in the cases he considered genuine: the sudden alteration of voice, the spontaneous knowledge of ancient languages the individual had never studied, the violent physical reaction to sacred objects, the revelation of private information about those present, information impossible to know by ordinary means. Each of these elements in isolation might find explanation in psychology or neurology. Together, in combination, in the same individual and at the same moment, they created a picture that the medical specialists present at the beginning of the rituals rarely manage to sustain using their customary categories. The case that served as the nucleus of the secret ritual within the Vatican involved a young woman. Her name is not known, and perhaps it is just as well that it is not. She arrived after a series of evaluations that, according to accounts, left doctors and psychiatrists in an uncomfortable position. Not because they had found something, but because they had found nothing. No diagnosis fit completely. No medication produced the expected effect. And certain behaviors, described by those who had accompanied her in the days prior to the ritual, defied clinical categories in ways that the very healthcare professionals recorded in their reports with unusual verbal caution, as if they feared what their own words might suggest. The room where the ritual was conducted was not a public temple. It was a secluded, austere space, designed precisely for this kind of ceremony, far from ears, far from eyes, far from any possibility of unauthorized documentation. The priests present were selected with care, each one with proven experience, each one versed in the protocols, the prayers, the possible reactions. And yet what began as a structured ceremony began, slowly, imperceptibly at first, to exhibit deviations that none of them had anticipated. Instinct is a form of knowledge that reason often rejects. But anyone who has stood before the inexplicable knows that instinct speaks before the mind does, and that silencing it carries a price. Comment on what your instinct feels in the face of what is being revealed here. Is it faith, or is it fear? Sometimes the most honest answer is born precisely in the space between those two possibilities. And if this account has ignited something in you, leave a sign of light. A small gesture, but a powerful one, because that is how the invisible finds its witnesses. When the ritual began, there was a recognizable order in the room. Latin prayers unfolded in precise sequence, each word chosen over centuries to serve a specific purpose. The priests moved with the cadence of those who know every step of the path. The young woman, initially restrained, seemed to respond to the environment with that particular form of tension that experienced exorcists describe as the resistance before the storm. It was expected. It was, in a certain way, reassuring, because it meant the protocol was working. Then something changed. not dramatically or immediately, the way fiction scripts it. It changed subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. The temperature of the room, which could not have dropped so abruptly without a verifiable physical cause, plummeted. The lights, powered by a stable electrical system, began to flicker in a pattern that corresponded to no known technical malfunction. And the voice that emerged from the young woman, a voice that was not entirely hers, began to speak of things she could not have known. This is the element that veteran exorcists always describe as the most disturbing, not the physical phenomena, not the sounds, not the violent reactions to the touch of sacred objects. The most disturbing is always the knowledge. The entity, if that is what one can call what inhabited that room, revealed with surgical precision aspects of the private lives of the priests present, sins that had never been publicly confessed, traumas that existed only in the most protected memory of each person, secrets that no research, no human investigation could have gathered in a single place at a single moment. One of the priests left the ceremony. He did not scream. He did not run. He simply stopped, looked at a specific point behind the altar, a point that appeared empty to the others, and walked out. Those who stayed noticed that he did not turn his eyes back toward what he had seen, and that in the days that followed, when anyone tried to ask him what had made him leave, he responded with a silence more eloquent than any word. There are things the eye sees that the tongue learns to protect, not out of cowardice, but out of an instinctive form of respect before what must not be spoken aloud. Whoever remains here in this narrative already carries the weight of this revelation, and it is legitimate to ask, as the priests in that room must have asked in some silent moment, which side of the veil one would choose to be on, the side of the belief that confronts, or the side of the forgetting that protects. The answer is not simple, and perhaps it is precisely that absence of simplicity that makes this subject so impossible to abandon. Subscribe and walk this journey. Each new episode is a key, and each key opens another seal. The point at which the ritual lost its recognizable structure was not marked by a single event. It was a progression, like the erosion of a coastline that appears stable until the moment it no longer is. The prayers continued, but the priests reciting them felt, each in his own way, each in his own time, that the words were meeting resistance different from the usual, not a resistance that retreats, a resistance that observes, that waits, that seems to know every move before it happens. The young woman, who at certain moments appeared lucidly present, looking around the room with an expression that alternated between exhaustion and something the witnesses described as almost compassion, became at other moments completely inaccessible to any human word. Her body displayed signs that the doctors present at the beginning of the ritual could no longer observe, as they had been instructed to withdraw. But the priests who remained described afterward, in fragmented accounts never officially recorded, movements that did not correspond to known human biomechanics. A rigidity followed by a flexibility that defied what muscles and bones permit. It was at this stage that the most disturbing revelations occurred. The entity present, or what the priests called it, with all the theological precision the term carries, began to articulate not only personal secrets, but something that seemed deeper, a form of collective memory belonging to no one present in that room. Names of ancient rituals, references to events not found in any accessible historical record, and, more unsettling than anything else, descriptions of previous encounters, as if that presence had been there before, as if it knew that room, that ritual, those men, not from the young woman's memory, but from a continuity of its own that transcended any individual life. The accounts of experienced exorcists always include a warning that is frequently ignored by those who approach the subject from the outside. The ritual is not a battle of brute force. It is a negotiation of limits. And there are cases, rare but documented among those who have lived these experiences, in which the ritual does not immediately expel. It only enrages. It only deepens the confrontation. It only opens, involuntarily, a door that the participants were not fully prepared to see opened. That is what some of those present in that room believed was happening when chaos settled in definitively. If you have made it this far, you are already part of this rite. The simple act of witnessing is a form of participation, because certain stories do not exist without someone to hear them with genuine attention. Leave your sign in the comments. That is how silence becomes community. That is how those who carry questions find others who also carry questions. And that is how this space, built between the visible and the invisible, continues to exist. Because the truth that inhabits the shadows needs witnesses in order not to disappear entirely. The silence arrives suddenly. As always happens with true silences, those that are not the absence of sound but the presence of something that has just withdrawn. The priests who remained in the room described that moment in slightly different ways, as is natural among witnesses to events that exceed ordinary language. But on one point all agreed. The change was immediate. And what remained, the young woman unconscious, the candles that flickered without a breeze and then steadied, the air gradually returning to a normal temperature, carried a quality of silence that none of them had experienced before that night. What happened to the young woman afterward is part of the information that was never formally recorded. Those involved were instructed not to discuss the case, not with threats, but with the kind of instruction accompanied by a tacit weight that requires no harsh words. Anyone who has gone through something like this knows that silence does not need to be imposed from outside. It is born from within. Because certain events are so far outside the structure of what the mind can integrate, that speaking about them aloud feels like a betrayal of something not yet fully understood. The question that persists, and that haunted many of those who were present at that secret ritual, is not easy to formulate without falling into one of the extremes this story typically provokes. It is not a matter of knowing whether what happened there was supernatural or had an undiscovered rational explanation. It is about something more fundamental. Why does the Vatican maintain active exorcists in the 21st century? If all of it were nothing more than collective superstition accumulated over the centuries, why would the Church continue investing in the training of priests specialized in precisely this kind of confrontation? The answer the Church itself offers publicly is carefully worded. But between that official answer and the corridors where silence keeps its memories, there is a distance that is not merely geographical. The secret exorcism that took place within the Vatican's walls is, ultimately, a mirror, not only of what the Church faces in its darkest moments, but of what every human being carries internally, that part which knows with a certainty that reason sometimes rejects, that there are dimensions of reality that escape our capacity to measure, catalog, and archive. The ritual that spiraled out of control revealed not only the limits of the priests present, it revealed the limits of language, of protocol, and of institutional certainty before what has no adequate category. And that is a mirror we all carry, regardless of belief or conviction. How many rituals like this one took place far from the eyes of the world? How many ended in absolute silence, not because there was no conclusion, but because the conclusion was impossible to translate into words the world could receive without being transformed? Those archives remain sealed. Those memories remain protected by a silence that is, simultaneously, institutional and profoundly human. And it is precisely at that frontier, between what official history records and what the shadows preserve, that the true mystery of the Vatican continues alive, pulsating, waiting for whoever has the courage to draw near without demanding that everything be explained. Write in the comments what the silence told you today. Sometimes that is where the truth manifests, not in certainties but in the questions that certain stories leave alive in us. The journey continues. In the next episode, another veil will be lifted, another Vatican corridor that the official world prefers not to illuminate. Subscribe and continue on this path. Each new episode is a flame lit in the dark, and the dark, as became evident here, is never merely the absence of light.